What's going on, guys? On today's episode of Ralph's Real Review, we're going to be going over Disney's first animated sequel and asking the question, why this one? If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so you can be notified every time we post, but let's get into the review. The Rescuers Down Under follows a couple of storylines loosely, but the main storyline is that there's this boy, his name is Cody. He knows where this rare, kind of eagle is in Australia, so he gets kidnapped by a poacher. I think his name is McLeach. Anyway, Miss Bianca and Bernard from the original film fly to Australia to save him and the eagle. Another storyline off this is that Bernard wants to marry Bianca, but when they get to Australia, there's a mouse named Jake who helps them with Cody, but kind of gets in the way of this wedding proposal. If y'all don't mind, I'm gonna call this either Down Under or Rescuers 2, so I don't have to keep saying The Rescuers Down Under. However, this movie is beautifully animated, and it is the first time that Disney went completely digital to create a movie. I looked into the CAP system from last episode, I'll link it here, but CAPS essentially means computer animated. So yeah, first time they did that fully. I don't really love the use of CGI in this movie completely. I feel like McLeach's vehicle in particular looked weird compared to the rest of the movie and the backgrounds, but overall, the colors are very vibrant, the locations are fun enough, and the CGI is mostly good. I did rank it behind Sleeping Beauty and The Little Mermaid because I felt those two movies were like pop off the screen different than other movies that were around at the time of their release. But besides that, there is no doubt that the animation in this movie is better than almost anything we've seen so far, so it lands at 3. For storytelling, I have Down Under at 15th. Mid is the word to describe this movie. Let's look at the pros and cons again, right? So first, there is no original music in this movie, and the movie doesn't need it, so I see that as a pro. There's nowhere in this movie where I stop and think, I really wish that there was a song here, so clearly it wasn't needed, and they didn't force it. Pro. However, there are some storylines that are just flat out uninteresting and feel like filler for a movie that doesn't really have much to do besides the same thing it did in the first one, which is save a kid. Bernard wanting to marry Miss Bianca, it's kind of filler to make Jake's character more interesting as a new male mouse, kind of taking her attention away from Bernard. But anyone with half a brain understands where that storyline is going to end up. And they didn't even really try to make it interesting or make us believe that it could go any other way. So that's that. Also, having Wilbur go through what he's going through, he gets an injury and he's with this weird Dr. Mouse. It's totally unnecessary to the movie. I don't know why they did it. The film does touch on some conservation themes, but overall, I'm really not impressed with this movie plot-wise, even though I do believe it is better than the original. For the characters, I have Down Under at 18th, right ahead of Ichabod and Mr. Toad and behind the Aristocats. Really, this is like a vibe ranking because none of these characters are so great where you can make like a definitive case either way. I feel like these versions of Bernard and Miss Bianca are better than what we got in the original movie. I also like Cody more than I like Penny. I think McLeach is a little bit more despicable in what we see him willing to do than Medusa was. So I also like Wilbur more than Orville, so better characters in the sequel than the original for sure. But when it comes down to it, I think for this category what I'm doing is, if I were to get a live action Aristocats or a sequel to either of these movies, which would get me more excited? And the answer to that is for sure the Aristocats, so Down Under at 18th. For the Disney factor, I have this movie at 21st. Now, oddly enough, even though this is the first movie completely made with that cap system, I feel like this movie looks more like a Disney movie than the original did, even though it wasn't trying anything different at the time. I think, however, that's probably where the positives end in this category. The lack of original music, while it didn't hurt in the storytelling department, it helped in the storytelling department, it does hurt here, especially when you're coming off a movie like The Little Mermaid. Although I will say the score was pretty good, but I'll touch on that in the music section. Speaking of the music section, I have to put Down Under at 25th in my music category. Most of my thoughts for this section are the same as what you would have heard in the Black Cauldron review, so I'll leave a link to that up here so you guys can go check that out. But overall, I feel the same as I did for that movie, but I like the score of this movie better, so I'm going to move it up a slot. For box office, Down Under comes in at 18th with a little over $111.8 million when adjusted for inflation. This movie was a disaster at the box office and not what you wanted when you just came off the boom that was The Little Mermaid. It made about half the money that the original movie did when you adjust for inflation, despite having critical response be positive. I think this movie may have been a casualty of what was coming out at the same time. It did release the same weekend as Home Alone and Rocky V, which, you know, Home Alone is a staple. Rocky V was a Rocky movie. When Disney saw it bomb week one, they did pull the plug on TV advertising, and from that point on, the film was doomed. I do wonder how this affected the company moving forward when it came to animating sequels, but I'll address that in the historical significance section later. I know I said later, but here we are. So historical significance, I do have Down Under at 16th. There's two things I really can't take away from this movie when it comes to this section, and one thing that I wonder about out loud, which I said in the last section. So let's stick with the facts first. Fact: this is the first movie to ever be made completely using caps. Also fact: this is the first Disney sequel. Both of those are semi-important. They're noteworthy for sure, but I'm not sure how much it really fits into the larger Disney story. However, I do wonder aloud, I think this would be the biggest thing here, if the bombing of this movie is what led to us getting all those straight-to-DVD sequels instead of Walt Disney animated sequels, right? I don't know that this is true or not, but in my mind, I can see an alternate timeline where this movie made a crap ton of money and Disney decided to go heavy on sequels 20 years earlier than they did in our reality, right? I know it's a hypothetical. I don't know that the box office bomb scared Disney away from sequels or not. I'm just kind of wondering out loud. That brings us to the tiers, which I thought was pretty easy to place Down Under. In terms of sequels, in my eyes, it did improve on the original in almost every way, minus box office success. The animation was pretty good. It was vibrant, although it was sometimes clunky. The plot was mediocre at best, and there is no music, which, like I said before, I think is kind of a pro for this movie. Its place historically is what really saves it from that skippable tier, though. At the end of the day, it is technically a Renaissance film, even if it is the worst Renaissance film, and it still remains Disney's first sequel and their first full use of caps. So this movie is mostly skippable unless you are a die-hard Disney fan who is looking to brush up on some of their history. That's going to do it for today's episode, guys. As you can all see, I'm still tinkering with video formats and lighting and learning how to use some of my new equipment. So please bear with me while I try to figure that out. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. You know we're growing slowly, but we are still growing, and I'd love to welcome you into our little community here. So definitely subscribe, hit the bell so you can be notified whenever I post new reviews. Not only in this series, but also looking into 2025. So I'm still preloading these as I'm on winter break and looking forward to the marathon. But I think by the time this video goes live, One of Them Days with Kiki Palmer and SZA should be coming out this week, as well as Wolfman. So if you're interested in discussing those movies, go ahead and follow me here. You can also follow me on TikTok at Ralph's Rapid Review, which is essentially like the 1-minute bite-sized version of these reviews. Go into the comments, guys. Tell me your thoughts about The Rescuers Down Under and or any tips or tricks you have for me as a growing creator. But that's it for the video, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.